Hey, stop scrolling for a second. What you're about to hear really happened to someone I know, and I still get chills thinking about it. A woman was on her knees, scrubbing marble under a burning sun, while the person who should have cared for her just watched from the shade. But someone was running toward that house. And what he did in the next 60 seconds changed everything for her forever. Stay with me. This one gets unbelievable. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you belong to? Drop it in the comments. I always love reading where you all are from. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones I've shared in a long time. A story about dignity, cruelty, and a kindness nobody expected. It's heartbreaking in places, but I promise you, it ends in a way that will stay with you. Let's get into it. Nobody thought a Tuesday morning could break a person. But it did. Maria Alvarez had been cleaning the Whitfield estate for almost 6 years. 6 years of waking up at 4:30 in the morning, taking 2 buses across town, and arriving before the sun even touched the tall iron gates of the property. She had learned every corner of that mansion, which floorboards creaked, which windows let in the most light, which vases were too expensive to breathe near. She wasn't just an employee. To herself at least, she was someone who took pride in her work. Her daughter Sophia was 12 years old, and every early morning bus ride, every sore knee, every callus on her hands, it was all for her. Maria used to tell Sophia, "We don't have much, but we have each other and we have hard work. That's enough." The Whitfield family had built their fortune in real estate 3 generations back. The current head of the household, Diane Whitfield, ran the home like a queen ran a kingdom. Rules, appearances, and control. Diane's son, Nathaniel, had been away for the last 2 years, expanding the family's business overseas. Maria had only met him a handful of times before he left, but she remembered him as different from his mother. Quieter, kinder, the kind of person who said thank you to the staff and meant it. That Tuesday started like any other. Maria arrived early, greeted by the sharp smell of fresh-cut grass and the distant hum of sprinklers. She began her usual routine, dusting, polishing, sweeping the wide marble terrace that wrapped around the back of the house. It was the terrace Diane loved most, the one she used for her garden parties, the one she called the crown of the estate. At around 11 that morning, Diane stepped out in a deep red gown, sunglasses pushed up into her hair, phone in hand. She looked at the terrace floor and stopped. "There's a stain here," she said, pointing to a faint discoloration near the far edge. "Right there. Do you see it?" Maria walked over, knelt down, and looked closely. It was barely visible, a trace of rust from an old planter that had been moved weeks ago. "I can get that out, ma'am. I'll use a stronger cleaner." "You'll get it out now," Diane said. "On your knees. I want to see you scrub it, not spray it and walk away like last time." Maria's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." What Maria didn't know yet was that this ordinary complaint about a stain was about to turn into something far crueler than she could have imagined. And somewhere miles away, a car was already pulling onto the highway that led straight to that house. The sun that day was merciless. Maria got down on her knees, bucket beside her, rag in hand. The marble, warmed by hours of direct sunlight, felt like a stovetop against her skin. She began to scrub, slow and steady, the way she always did. Careful, respectful, professional. Diane didn't leave. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching. "Harder," she said. "You're barely touching it." Maria pressed down, her knuckles turning white around the rag. Sweat rolled down her forehead and dripped onto the stone. She kept working, saying nothing, because saying something back had never gone well before. An hour passed. Then 2. By early afternoon, the sun was directly overhead, and Maria's uniform was soaked through. Her knees had gone from sore to burning. She asked quietly if she could take a short break for water. Diane looked at her watch. "You'll finish the terrace first. It's not that big." It was that big. It was enormous. But Maria didn't argue. She thought of Sophia at school, of the rent due at the end of the month, of the fact that jobs like this one weren't easy to find twice. By 2 in the afternoon, Maria's hands were trembling. Her vision blurred at the edges from the heat. She kept scrubbing anyway, because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. It was around that time that Diane's friend, Carol, arrived for their usual afternoon tea. Carol stepped out onto the terrace, took one look at Maria on her knees under the blazing sun, and let out an uncomfortable laugh. "Diane, is this really necessary?" "She needs to learn," Diane said simply, sipping her iced tea in the shade of the veranda. "People like her don't take pride in their work unless you make them." Maria heard every word. She said nothing. She just kept scrubbing, her fingers raw, her throat dry as sand. What none of them knew was that a black car had just turned off the main road and was now approaching the estate's long driveway. Inside it was someone who had flown for 14 hours straight, who hadn't even stopped to change out of his travel clothes, because he wanted to surprise his mother by coming home a day early. He had no idea what he was about to walk into. But the moment he did, nothing about that house would ever be the same again. Nathaniel Whitfield stepped out of the car, stretching after the long flight, a small smile already forming at the thought of surprising his mother. He'd missed the estate, the gardens, the quiet mornings, even the predictable creak of the front doors. He walked around the side of the house instead of the front, planning to sneak up through the garden the way he used to as a kid. That's when he saw her. A woman on her knees on the terrace, drenched in sweat, scrubbing the stone with shaking hands. Her uniform clung to her back. Her lips were pale. And standing a few feet away in the shade, his mother sipped iced tea like she was watching nothing more than a gardener trimming hedges. For a second, Nathaniel didn't understand what he was seeing. Then it hit him all at once. "Mom, what is this?" Diane turned, surprised, then quickly composed herself. "Nathaniel, you're early. I wasn't expecting. Why is she on the ground in the middle of the day? Look at her." His voice rose, sharper than either woman had ever heard it. "Maria, are you okay? Maria." Maria looked up at him, disoriented, her vision swimming. She tried to answer, tried to say she was fine, but no sound came out. Her body swayed, and before anyone could react, she collapsed sideways onto the hot marble. "Maria!" Nathaniel was at her side in an instant, kneeling beside her, checking her pulse, calling her name. His hands, still cool from the air-conditioned car, pressed against her burning skin. "Someone call an ambulance now. Call an ambulance." Diane stood frozen, the iced tea glass still in her hand, watching her son cradle a housekeeper in his arms like she was family. Carol had gone pale, quietly stepping back into the house. "She's been out here for hours," Nathaniel said, his voice breaking with disbelief as he looked up at his mother. "Hours, Mom? In this heat? Over a stain? I didn't think." Diane started. "You didn't think," he repeated, cold and quiet. "You never think about people like her." He lifted Maria gently, cradling her against his chest, and started walking toward the shade, shouting for water, for a cool towel, for anyone to help. In that moment, nothing else in the world existed to him. Not the business deal waiting on his phone, not his mother's stunned expression, not the estate he was supposed to inherit one day. Just the woman in his arms, and the terrifying thought that he might have arrived 1 minute too late. The next few minutes felt like hours. Nathaniel laid Maria down carefully in the shaded part of the garden, propping a cushion under her head, pressing a cool, damp towel to her forehead and neck. Her breathing was shallow. Her lips had a faint blue tint at the edges that made his stomach drop. "Stay with me," he said quietly, holding her hand. "Help is coming. Please stay with me." The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, the longest 12 minutes of his life. Paramedics rushed in, checking her vitals, calling out numbers Nathaniel didn't fully understand, but that made his chest tighten with fear. Heat exhaustion, dangerously close to heatstroke. Dehydration. Elevated heart rate. "She's lucky someone got her out of the sun when they did," one paramedic said. "Another 20 minutes out there and this could have been a lot worse." Nathaniel closed his eyes, the weight of those words settling over him. He rode in the ambulance with her, ignoring his mother's calls, ignoring the questions from the staff gathered by the gate. At the hospital, he sat in the waiting room in his wrinkled travel clothes, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor, replaying the image over and over. Maria collapsing, his mother standing there with her iced tea, unmoved. It was there, in that sterile hospital hallway, that Nathaniel made a decision that would change more than just one afternoon. He thought about all the years Maria had worked in that house, quietly, faithfully, without complaint, while people like his mother treated her presence as something to be tolerated rather than respected. He thought about how easy it had been for his family to look past her, to see the work but never the person doing it. When the doctor finally came out and told him Maria was stable, that she'd need rest and fluids but would recover fully, Nathaniel felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in hours. He walked into her hospital room quietly. Maria was awake, pale but alert, and 4 in her arm, confusion and embarrassment in her eyes. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble. Don't," he said gently, pulling a chair beside her bed. "You didn't do anything wrong. I'm the one who's sorry. I'm sorry it took me walking in at the right moment for someone to finally see what was happening to you." Maria's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for years, not just from that day, but from every day she'd swallowed her exhaustion and kept working, kept smiling, kept surviving. Neither of them knew it yet, but that hospital room was the beginning of something neither one had expected. Maria stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. Nathaniel didn't leave. He sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside her bed for most of the night, occasionally dozing off, waking each time a nurse came in to check on her. Around midnight, Maria stirred and found him still there. "You should go home," she whispered. "You must be exhausted from your flight." "I'm fine," he said. "I'd rather be here." She studied him for a moment, this man she'd known mostly from a distance for years. Polite nods in hallways, brief conversations about the weather, nothing more. She'd never imagined he would be the one sitting beside her hospital bed at midnight, worry etched across his face. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why does it matter to you?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "Because 6 years ago, when my father died, you were the one who left a plate of food outside my door every night for 2 weeks because you noticed I wasn't eating. You never said anything about it. You just did it. I never forgot that." Maria's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't realized he'd known that was her. "People think kindness like that goes unnoticed," he continued. "It doesn't. Not by everyone." The next morning, Maria was discharged with instructions to rest for a few days. Nathaniel insisted on driving her home himself, despite her protests that she could take the bus like always. When they arrived at her small apartment, Sophia came running out, tears in her eyes, having been terrified all night after hearing what happened. "Mama!" She threw her arms around Maria, holding on tight. Nathaniel stood back, watching the two of them, something tightening in his chest. He thought about his own mother, about the distance that had always existed between them, about how different real warmth looked when you actually witnessed it. Before he left, he turned to Maria. "Take the week off. Fully paid. And when you come back, things are going to be different. I promise you that." Maria didn't know what he meant exactly, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe someone was actually keeping a promise made to her. Back at the estate, Diane was waiting for her son, arms crossed, ready to explain herself. But what Nathaniel had to say to her that evening would set off a chain of changes neither of them saw coming. "We need to talk," Nathaniel said, closing the study door behind him. Diane sat stiffly in her chair. "I already told the staff to send flowers to the hospital. I hope she's all right." "Flowers?" Nathaniel repeated flatly. "She almost died on our property, Mom. Under our roof. Because of a stain on the terrace. And your response is flowers. I didn't intend for it to go that far, Nathaniel. You know how these things are. Standards matter in this house." "Standards," he said, his voice rising slightly before he caught himself and steadied it. "Do you know how long she's worked for this family? 6 years. 6 years of showing up before sunrise, of taking care of every corner of this house, of never once complaining. And the moment she needed 5 minutes to get water, you told her to keep scrubbing." Diane's jaw tightened, but for the first time, something like discomfort flickered across her face. "I built this house's reputation on discipline," she said. "On excellence. You built it on people like Maria being invisible to you," Nathaniel said quietly. "That ends now." Over the following days, Nathaniel made changes across the estate. Proper breaks, water stations, shaded rest areas for outdoor staff, a strict policy against anyone being made to work through extreme heat. He personally reviewed the wages of every household employee and adjusted them to reflect years of loyal service that had gone unrecognized for far too long. But the biggest change came 2 weeks later, when Maria returned to work. Nathaniel called her into the study, the same room where he'd confronted his mother. Maria stepped in nervously, unsure what to expect. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what kind of person I want to be, and what kind of home I want this to be. I'd like to offer you a new position if you're willing. Estate manager. You'd oversee the household staff, coordinate everything, and have a real say in how things are run here. Better pay, better hours, and most importantly, respect." Maria stood there, stunned into silence. It was more than she'd ever imagined possible. Not just a job, but a chance at a different kind of life for her and Sophia. "Why me?" she finally asked, echoing the same question she'd asked him in the hospital. Nathaniel smiled softly. "Because you've spent 6 years taking care of this family without anyone truly seeing you. I want to be the person who finally does." Word of what happened traveled fast among the household staff, and even faster through the small, tight-knit community Maria belonged to. Some people whispered that she was lucky. Others said it was about time someone in that family did the right thing. But Maria didn't feel lucky. She felt, for the first time in years, like she mattered. As the weeks passed, she settled into her new role as estate manager with the same quiet dedication she'd always brought to cleaning. Except now, her voice actually carried weight. She created fair schedules for the outdoor staff, made sure everyone had proper breaks, and became the person new employees came to when they needed guidance or support. Diane, to everyone's surprise, slowly began to change too. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It started with small things, a thank you she hadn't said before, an acknowledgement of a job well done, an uncomfortable but genuine apology to Maria one quiet afternoon in the garden. "I was raised to believe that kindness to staff was a weakness," Diane admitted. "My mother ran this house the same way, and her mother before her. I never questioned it until Nathaniel forced me to. Maria nodded, unsure how to respond to an apology she'd never expected to receive. It's not too late to change, ma'am. Please, Diane said. Call me Diane. It wasn't a perfect transformation. Old habits lingered, and there were moments where Diane's sharpness returned. But the terrace where Maria had once collapsed became, ironically, a place of quiet conversations between the two women. Conversations about family, about loss, about the kind of legacy each of them wanted to leave behind. Meanwhile, Nathaniel found himself visiting the household staff areas more often, learning names he'd never bothered to learn before, understanding the quiet strength it took to run a home like this from the inside. And more than once, he found himself seeking out Maria, not as her employer, but as someone whose perspective he'd grown to deeply respect. Sophia, now allowed to visit the estate after school while Maria worked, would sit in the garden doing her homework, sometimes chatting with Nathaniel about her day. He began helping her with her math homework, something that started as a small kindness and slowly became something she looked forward to every afternoon. Nobody could have predicted it, but the estate that had once been the site of Maria's lowest moment was slowly becoming something else entirely, a place where she and her daughter finally belonged. Almost a year passed. Maria's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined that scorching afternoon on the terrace. She had savings now, real savings, for the first time in her adult life. Sophia had enrolled in an after-school program that Nathaniel had quietly arranged and funded, though he never made a show of it. The estate itself felt different too. Lighter somehow, less like a fortress and more like an actual home. Staff members who had once tiptoed around Diane now greeted her with genuine warmth, a shift that still surprised even Diane herself some days. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Diane's sister Regina visited one weekend and was appalled to learn that the housekeeper, as she still insisted on calling Maria, had been promoted to estate manager and was, in her words, practically running the household. "This isn't how things are done, Diane," Regina said sharply over dinner. "You're going to lose all sense of order in this house." "I've gained more order in the last year than I had in the last 20, Diane replied evenly, surprising everyone at the table, including herself. "Maria runs this household better than anyone I've ever hired. And she does it with a kindness I'm only now learning to appreciate." Regina scoffed and left early the next morning, clearly disapproving, but her opinion no longer carried the weight it once might have. That evening, after the tension of the visit had settled, Nathaniel found Maria in the garden, watching Sophia chase fireflies near the hedges. "She's grown so much this year," he said, nodding toward Sophia. "So have I," Maria replied softly. "I used to think surviving was the best I could hope for. Now I actually think about the future. About what's possible." Nathaniel sat down beside her on the garden bench, the same bench near the terrace where everything had once gone so terribly wrong. "I think about the future a lot too lately," he said carefully. "More than I expected to." Maria glanced at him, catching something unspoken in his tone, something that had been quietly growing between them for months. Not just gratitude, not just respect, but something warmer, something neither of them had said out loud yet. "Nathaniel," she said gently, "we should be careful. People will talk." "Let them," he said. "I'm tired of living my life around what people expect instead of what actually matters." Neither of them said more that night. But as Sophia's laughter echoed through the garden and the sun dipped low behind the hedges, something between them had shifted. Quietly, undeniably, and for good. It took another few months before either of them acknowledged what had grown between them. It happened on an ordinary evening, not unlike hundreds of others. Maria was finishing paperwork in the study, and Nathaniel stopped by, as he often did, to say good night before heading upstairs. Except this time he lingered in the doorway. "Maria," he said. "I need to say something, and I need you to know I mean every word of it." She looked up from her desk, heart suddenly racing. "I've spent the last year watching you rebuild a life you deserved all along," he continued. "Watching you care for this house, for the staff, for Sophia, with a strength I don't think I fully understood before. And somewhere along the way, what started as respect turned into something I can't ignore anymore." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she set down her pen. "Nathaniel, I work for you. There are things people will say." "I don't care what people say," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I care about what's true. And the truth is, I think about you far more than an employer should think about an employee. I have for a long time." The room went silent except for the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner. "I never expected this," Maria admitted quietly. "Not after everything. I didn't think I deserved to hope for something like this again." "You deserve more than you've ever let yourself believe," he said. It wasn't a dramatic, movie-perfect moment. There were no fireworks, no sweeping music. Just two people, quietly acknowledging something honest that had grown between them through months of shared meals, shared struggles, and shared healing. They agreed to take things slowly, carefully, mindful of Sophia, mindful of the staff, mindful of Diane. But for the first time in years, Maria allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't just about survival, a future built on genuine partnership, respect, and love earned rather than given carelessly. Diane, when she eventually learned of the relationship, surprised everyone once again. "I watched my son become a better man because of her," she said simply. "I won't stand in the way of that." 2 years after that scorching afternoon on the terrace, the Whitfield estate hosted its annual garden gathering, the same event Diane had once used to showcase wealth and status to her friends. This year it was different. Maria stood on the terrace, no longer on her knees scrubbing stone, but standing tall beside Nathaniel, greeting guests as his fiancée. Sophia, now 14, ran through the garden with friends from her new school, laughter echoing off the same walls that had once witnessed her mother's collapse. The stain that had started it all had long since been repaired, but more importantly, so had the house itself, in ways far deeper than marble and stone. Diane watched from a distance, a small, genuine smile on her face as she saw her son laugh freely, saw Maria confidently direct the event staff with the same care she once poured into scrubbing floors, saw Sophia twirl happily under the string lights strung across the terrace. Later that evening, Nathaniel took the microphone to make a toast, something he rarely did. 2 years ago on this very terrace, I learned something I'll never forget," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet garden. "That the measure of a person isn't found in how they treat those who can do something for them, but in how they treat those who can't. I found the person I love because of a moment of pain, but what grew from it was something none of us expected. Healing, family, and a home that finally feels like it means something." He looked at Maria, standing beside him, eyes glistening with emotion. "To second chances," he said, raising his glass. "And to the people brave enough to keep working hard, keep believing, even when the world gives them every reason not to." The crowd raised their glasses. Maria felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from pain this time, but from a happiness she never thought she'd be allowed to feel. Sometimes the hardest days of our lives quietly become the beginning of our greatest blessings. Maria never asked for sympathy. She never asked for a rescue. She simply kept showing up, kept working hard, kept loving her daughter with everything she had. And in the end, that quiet strength was seen by exactly the right person, at exactly the right moment. If this story touched your heart today, remember this. Kindness always matters, even when no one seems to be watching. Because somewhere, someone is always watching. And your strength today might just be building the doorway to your tomorrow. If you love this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one, and share this with someone who needs a little hope today. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.